What is going on to all my You fans out there, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are here to break down and review You Season 4 Part 1 Episode 1, which is titled Joe Takes a Holiday. Now, the plan for this new season and this new Part 1 is to test out something new. I'll be individually reviewing each episode of Part 1, one at a time, with no spoilers of the further episodes. So the idea behind that is I'll be watching along with you all in hopes that you'll watch the episode and then come back to the channel and watch the review after. So any predictions or theories I'll be sharing will be based solely on that particular episode. With that in mind, all the links to the remaining episode breakdowns of this Part 1 will be available below in the description. With that out of the way, yeah, boy is a fan of this show. Now, at first, it started off as a guilty pleasure of mine, but over time, I'm a fan of the show. I also really enjoy seeing how the hell will Joe manage to get himself out of these murderous situations. And I've covered the previous seasons of this show, which you all can check out. I'm very excited to see how this all takes place and what's going to happen this time around, especially knowing that this is a Part 1 of a Part 2. So you got to imagine this Part 1 is going to end on a pretty crazy cliffhanger. Which, speaking of cliffhangers, I didn't watch the trailer for this new season because I already knew I was going to watch it. But saying all that to say, the reveal that happens in this episode really caught me by surprise. With that being out of the way, y'all, we got an episode to break down. Full spoilers ahead. As we're introduced to this new American professor teaching short stories, as a fan of this series, this is the perfect job for Joe, aka William, who goes by the name of Jonathan Moore, which we actually get the origin of where that name comes from a little bit later in this episode. We're introduced to one of the many new cast members of this new season who goes by the name of Malcolm, who's also a professor, but also an a-hole. Malcolm really wants to learn more about Jonathan and wants to hang out with him more, but we see that Jonathan's been avoiding him, and he's also not a fan of him. And Malcolm, we got a lot to discuss about him a little bit later. As we see, Jonathan, he's just right at home at London. He even says that the Brits are the most literary people on earth and they respect their books. And we know how much Joe loves books and respects books. So he goes on to say that the LA suburban lifestyle was hell for him and that London, once again, is just a perfect place for him. And he just needs this place to be, to let his mind go, let his past go. And he needs this much needed holiday as he's adjusting to his new life and his new neighborhood, which is really cut right out of a Hugh Grant movie. We see Jonathan says he never wants to fall in love. He doesn't want to get involved in people's life. He just wants to focus on his books. Well, that's shortly lived because we see that he's living across the street from Malcolm, who also lives with his girlfriend who goes by the name of Kate. And I'm telling y'all right now, I have a feeling that she's going to be very important to this new season. And yeah, y'all remember 2 seconds ago how Jonathan said that he won't be involved in people's lives? Well, that didn't last long because he is now invested in learning more about Kate. Now, we're going to kind of put this storyline aside and kind of focus on the flashbacks here for a second. And in the flashbacks in this premiere episode, we see Joe is searching for Mairin and he finds her in France, which he learns that she was actually going to London for this art show, which explains why Jonathan found his way to London, because he was actually looking for Mairin. Now, he does find her, and let me know in the comments, for a brief second there, she seemed to smile, but that also could just be made up in Jonathan's head. She eventually runs from him, he catches her, and they have a conversation. Now, within this conversation, she's very upfront with him. You're a murderer, you killed my ex-husband, you killed your wife, and I'm honestly afraid for my life right now. Now, Joe is trying to play it smooth. He tells her, I'm not a murderer, and I'm not a murderer, and I'm going to prove I'm not a murderer. He lets her go. Now, if you've seen, obviously, the previous 3 seasons, this is only, really the second time he's let a woman go, the first time being Jenna Ortega's character, which I'm telling y'all right now, fingers crossed, I really do hope that they found a way to implement her in this new season, because obviously she knows about Joe, but also she's a mega star and I'm a big fan of hers. But as I digress, we see that he lets her go. And the question I have for you all, will that come back to bite him in the ass a little bit later as we see this mysterious individual is watching him? Now, we find out that this mysterious person goes by the name of Elliot. What a great name. He is hired by Ray Quinn, and he's hired to actually kill Joe. But we see Elliot has plans of his own, and he actually wants to work and exploit Joe. And this is where we see that it is Elliot that is actually the one responsible for giving him the Jonathan profile. But there's a catch with this new lifestyle, this new name, this new visa passport, and everything like that. In order to make this seem as Joe is dead, he has to go along with tying up loose ends. that loose end being Mairin, and we see Elliot is telling him he must kill her. So we're going to get back to that in a second here, but kind of focusing on this flashback sequence. Me personally, I'm very curious to see how the Quinn's going to play into this new season, whether that's Dottie or obviously the husband, but more importantly, Henry. Do you all think that we're going to get some scenes or get moments of Henry within this new season? Let me know your thoughts on that. And again, we'll get back to the flashback sequence when we break down the ending of this episode. But meanwhile, we see Kate is mugged, but Jonathan can't resist to help her, which he eventually does, but he does request that name is not brought up in the police report for obvious reasons. Saving Kate's life, Malcolm insists that Jonathan go with them to the most exclusive club in Soho, where he meets all these new privileged individuals. So breaking down these new characters, we have Penelope, who's an influencer. We meet her boyfriend, who goes by the name of Adam, who's actually the owner of this particular hottest exclusive club in Soho. We meet a Nigerian princess who goes by the name of Blessing. We have Simon and Sophie Sue. Simon's an artist and they both come from money, as well as Sophie. She's also an influencer. And then we also have like kind of secondary characters, Connie and Gemma, which we don't learn too much about, but I'm sure we will in the future episodes. But one character that I want to talk about for a second, he goes by the name of Reese. Now, Reese is a book writer. He's also the son of a duke, and he seems to have this shared familiarity with Joe and his backstory. So he's someone that Joe, or I should say Jonathan, connects with in this episode, and I have my eye on him. Let me know if you guys are suspicious about Reese in the comments. But as we see during this scene, I want to focus on two characters, and that is Simon and Sophie. We see when Simon is introduced to Jonathan, I found it interesting that he says, I have enough friends, but come back when one of them is dead. And he looks directly at Malcolm when he says that. And literally seconds later, when we are introduced to Sophie, Malcolm calls her a sociopath, and she nicely says to him to go screw himself and that she hopes that he dies. That is two members of the same family that wants to see Malcolm dead, and Jonathan notices that. I have my eyes on those two right now, and we'll talk about them here in a second. But Jonathan is given this alcohol. He's kind of going on this trippy journey, and we see Malcolm tells him that he should let the woman go who broke his heart and move on. And we see Jonathan isn't a fan of what he's saying there, which might lead to him thinking to what happens to Malcolm a little bit later, as we see him learning little bits and pieces of these new characters. And he also kind of gives a little bit of his backstory, what brought him to London. But it's important to point out another scene here, and I'm talking about Sophie. She tells Jonathan the following. Did he tell you he's royal adjacent? He dated the Middletons, and Malcolm is a liar. So again, this is pointing towards a member of the Sue family isn't a fan of Malcolm. And to me, right now, they're kind of my prime suspects because they kind of remind me of this kind of brother and sister duo, kind of like 40 in Love. We see Jonathan eventually makes it back home, but he passes out. He barely remembers what happens the night before, but he wakes up to finding a dead body in his flat, and it's no other than Malcolm with a knife in his chest, but also he has a finger missing, which I found to be very interesting. So you can tell how much Jonathan hated Malcolm because he literally didn't even flinch, didn't bat an eye. He didn't even seem to care that he had a dead body in Malcolm's body in his house. He really didn't like him. But I couldn't help, if I'm being honest with you all, to feel like this was kind of felt familiar. It kind of reminded me a little bit of season 2 where Joe believed that he had killed Delilah. So it kind of reminded me of that sequence there. As we see, Jonathan believes that he did this because, of course, he hated Malcolm, and he believes that he probably said something like when he was talking about Marianne earlier, that's probably what led him to dying. But he notices that he's missing that finger, and that finger seemed to have a pretty important ring on it. So my question is, who took this ring, and was it some type of trophy for this individual? As we see, Jonathan's going back to his old ways, and now he has to find a way to get rid of the body. As we cut to the scene of Cardi B playing in the background, and Jonathan has a half of a football game to get rid of this body, and we get one of the more bloodier scenes that we've seen so far in this entire series. As we fast forward to him getting rid of the body, he's having this conversation with Reese, as he's giving Jonathan words of encouragement to face his problems and to embrace everything for this road of redemption, which again, Jonathan still believes he's a good guy. All the things he's did was for the right cause. And again, Reese being the one to tell him that makes me believe that Reese also has a dark past and he had to find his way to redemption, and I can't wait to see what those moments were. As we wrap up this first episode, we end with seeing Jonathan going back to that flashback. He is tasked with killing Marianne. Does he do it? Of course he doesn't do it. He loves her, but he does take her necklace and he takes a picture of it, pretending to have had killed her to give it proof to Elliot. Now, I'm going to be honest with you all. If Elliot is some type of badass hitman, just taking a simple picture of someone's necklace seems to be a very silly way to confirm you killed someone. So I am to believe Elliot won't believe him. He's going to probably try to attempt to kill Mairin, and I think that might be a plot that we can explore. Let me know your thoughts on that. As we end with seeing Kate, who is slightly concerned that Malcolm is missing, but she also doesn't seem that concerned because it seems like that's something that he does on a regular, as she invites Jonathan to this dinner date, which Penelope actually wanted to see Jonathan there because they had a very good connection. And we see Kate does reveal to Jonathan that she didn't tell the police that she was helped out by him in the mugging. As Jonathan arrives to the party, he receives a message from a very high security app from a stranger, and this stranger is impressed by his actions, and they go ahead and kind of reveal themselves as, if not the killer, they were probably involved with the killing of Malcolm, who we see wanted to put the blame on Jonathan. So we end the episode at the table with all the other privileged new characters, and Jonathan puts the question out there, who was the killer? So again, just got briefly going over my suspects right now. I have the Sue siblings being my main suspects just because, again, they give me that 40 and love vibes, and I think they might have something to do with it, especially them mentioning that they want him to die. But then also that Reese character. He seems to have a dark past that tie into what Jonathan, a.k.a. Joe, might have done. I'm very intrigued to learn more about him because he also seems to be kind of the odd man out. Every one of these rich, privileged people seem to be a-holes, but he seems to be really grounded. So I'm very curious to see what is it that got him attached to these people. So Reese is someone else, but I also can't ignore the power couple, Penelope and Adam. They seem like a Joe and Love 2.0. And then lastly, Kate, someone that seems to be so disinterested in Joe, or I should say Jonathan. You can't trust him. I think she has some dark secrets. I think she has some things that she's hiding. So overall, I thought this was a solid way to return to this new season, having Joe now being used as his toy with this killer / stalker and him being kind of like a Sherlock Holmes meets Dexter. I'm into that. Very much enjoyed this episode, and I'm very excited to see what happens next. Like I said up top, this is just me watching the first episode. I'm ahead and going to watch episode 2 now. Episode 2, titled Portrait of an Artist. Now, like I mentioned in my episode 1 breakdown, this is part of a series of videos in which I will be breaking down each episode of part 1 individually with the knowledge of only that particular episode. So in this breakdown, I'll only be referring to events that we learned in episode 1 and what shakes down in episode 2. Open the episode with the question that we were posed with at the end of episode 1, which was who killed Malcolm. We see Jonathan looking across the table at all these potential killers, as we see Adam jokingly warning Jonathan about murdering him if he steals the spotlight after giving some kind words to Simon on this special occasion. Now, going back to my thoughts on episode 1, you all know Adam was definitely one of my number one suspects. Him and Penelope probably working together as this kind of power couple, sort of kind of would have happened if Love and Joe stayed together. But we're going to learn a lot about Adam in this episode. One thing in particular that I didn't care to know about, but we'll talk about that later. As we go back to Jonathan's home, he has an invitation there that was given to him by Kate. Now, Kate seems to be on his radar now, and throughout this episode, we're watching Jonathan kind of pick and choose who he believes the murderer is, which leads him to dive into these books about murder mysteries in hopes to study the killer's next move. Now, we know as an audience, Joe, you're a killer, man, so he kind of knows certain things, but he's never met someone that's kind of leaving it as a mystery, which leads him to talking to Nadia. Now, I didn't really talk too much about Nadia in my episode 1 breakdown because there wasn't a ton from her, but this episode was the complete opposite. She is the perfect individual to kind of look into these murder mysteries, and she knows all the tropes. She tells Jonathan, number 1, there's no coincidences. Number 2, motives tend to all point towards 3 things: sex, money, and revenge. And number 3, the first suspect tends to be the next victim, which is very key. Now, with all this information in mind, he thinks Elliot might be the lead suspect now. It was just so funny seeing Jonathan going back and forth. Wait, it's Kate, it's Adam, now it's Elliot. But we get this scene here with Elliot as he seems to want to move past this, and he wants to leave his hit jobs behind him, and he's living this new life now. But let's talk about this for a hot second. Elliot, he's going to return, right? And also the involvement with the Quins after losing 40 and then losing their daughter and knowing where their grandson Henry is. I am to believe that Elliot will come back some way, somehow. At least I hope so, because that would seem like a waste of a character. But also, I believe the Quins are going to still be involved. But that's just my working theory for now. But talking a little bit about Nadia, if you're a Scream fan like I am, doesn't Nadia kind of remind you all of Randy? Because she is just like so knowledgeable about all these things. But again, I definitely have my suspicions on her, but not necessarily maybe being the murderer, but in particularly her relationship that she has with Malcolm. As we see a new message coming in taunting Jonathan, he knows that this, or to say he or she knows that Jonathan isn't Professor and Jonathan isn't even their real name. But the question is, who will figure out the other person's true identity first? And it's kind of a ticking time bomb that we get throughout this episode. But as we see, Jonathan and Penelope had shared some secrets together the other night, and she really has taken a liking to him. She's really interested in making him a friend as they offer him a free outfit for Simon's big show that he's having later in this episode. So one of the themes so far in this episode that we can clearly see, everyone hated Malcolm. And also, Malcolm seems to have dirt on everyone, which might have led to his death, which leads Jonathan to stealing a key to Malcolm's office in which he finds the secrets and the dirt that Malcolm had on others. And remember, money was a key thing that Nadia mentioned, which, funny enough, speaking of Nadia, she happens to just be coming around the office kind of late hours, which again makes me think that there might have been a relationship established between Nadia and Malcolm. And if you even remember in episode 1, Malcolm kind of joked around about having relationships with his students. So again, Nadia is someone that we will be focusing on. But time to start the spying as we see Jonathan kind of checking off these potential other killers. Right now, he's checking off Gemma and also Princess, who goes by the name of Blessings. They're kind of low on his list, but he's still circling on Adam. He calls him a charming bully, and he mentions that Adam's name was actually brought up in that diary that was found in Malcolm's office. As we see, secrets are being revealed. And like I mentioned up top, there's some things I didn't want to learn about with Adam, this being one of them. He has a fetish, and that is having people pee on him, giving him a golden shower. As we see, Vix catches Jonathan spying on him doing this, and we see Jonathan making up this lie about researching books on the rich. Vic doesn't buy it, but he lets him go after he takes the money that we saw Jonathan find in Malcolm's office, and he tells Jonathan, let's just pretend you have amnesia and you didn't see anything happen. This makes me believe that Vic knows everything about all these privileged people. He probably knows all their deepest and darkest secrets. So I am to believe that not Vic is the killer, but he's someone that will probably be beneficial to learning more information about if I was Jonathan. Now, in this part of the episode, all the signs are pointing towards Adam as the motives are starting to line up, that Malcolm actually knew about his secret fetish as he wrote this in his journal. But we know it just seems too easy, right? After having this conversation with Adam, that is the case. It is confirmed that he's kind of going back to square one because Adam kind of warns him that you shouldn't get into sharing your private business with Malcolm. So right now, like I said, Adam isn't the main suspect, at least for now. But speaking of business, a random woman walks into a facility where his art show is being held, and it's actually the same woman that let Joe sneak into the back. Now she's there to embarrass Simon in front of everyone. She throws red paint on the work, she throws paint on him, and she yells to everyone, tell them that you're a fake, as she gets escorted out by Vic. Now, quick on his feet, we see Simon pretends that this was all part of his show, but Kate is aware of the situation, that he might be a fraud, and this is where Jonathan steps in and wants to help her find this woman. Now, we end up meeting this individual who goes by the name of Blue. Now, Blue was actually an assistant of Simon, but she also was the person behind his work. Now, she tells them a little bit more information, that this isn't the first time he's done this. He's done this to other girls, and he not only lies and kind of has them be forgotten about, but he also gets them addicted to drugs. And this is where we see Kate walks off. She writes her a check for for, I believe, $3,000. We see that Jonathan stays behind, and this is where he learned that Malcolm actually came to her first in hopes to expose Simon and some of his other friends before he ended up getting killed. Now, of course, no one knows that Malcolm is dead except for Jonathan. Now, as the plot thickens, in my comments on episode 1, when we remember that Simon said that, oh, if you want to be a friend, maybe one of our other friends have to be killed, that's starting to gain a little bit of traction, but my theory on Simon being involved is going to be derailed and debunked pretty soon. Nadia mentioned your number one suspect tends to be your next victim, and surprise, surprise, Simon, he ends up getting killed by Jonathan Stalker, and probably the person that's responsible for killing Malcolm as well, as his MO seems to be leaving a knife in the victim's chest, but also taking a piece of their body. Episode 1, it was Malcolm's finger. Now in episode 2, it's the ear. So what is this adding up to? It seems to be pointing towards some type of message. I don't know if you use the finger analogy. Maybe Malcolm was pointing the fingers at people and not taking responsibility, and the ear being like Simon's listening or stealing people's ideas. That's kind of where my head's at now. As we cut to the scene of seeing Simon's quote-unquote closest friends not really caring that he's dead, this leads us to a really interesting scene where we see Jonathan talking to Reese as he's somewhat mourning Simon, which again goes back to my comments in episode 1. He doesn't seem to fit in with his crew, and even Jonathan brings it up here. But the question is Reese being genuine? I really am suspicious about what was it that, and he even mentions in his comments that he is friends with them because they know him from his past and they took care of him. So again, what did Reese do? What is his dark past that leads into him being friends with them? And again, is he being genuine? Reese, I got my eyes on you. Moving forward, we cut on to Kate, who does have a bit of a heart because we see her taking care of Blue and she wants to help her out in rehab. But then the question is, why does she hide this nice side about her? Very curious on Kate, but I also have a feeling that Kate and Jonathan will have some type of romance going on. But fast forward to Jonathan, he's starting to think that Malcolm and Nadia may have been in a relationship as he decides to help her out during the absence of Malcolm in her story. So again, I'm a firm believer right now that Nadia, she knows a lot, but she also probably had some type of relationship that might have been consensual with Malcolm. That's where my head's at right now. Let me know if you all are thinking the same. As we wrap up this episode, we got to remember, Jonathan's been distracted this entire episode, so he's kind of lost his track of mind in regards to the race of uncovering the stalker's identity as he returns home to find out that he's lost that game because the stalker has found out Jonathan, or should I say the history of Joe, as he puts it all on his wall. He knows exactly who Jonathan is. So to me, this was a fantastic episode. Again, I enjoyed episode 1, but to me, this episode was just so much more layers. The mystery was so intriguing. And of course, we got the murdering of Simon. So he's no longer on the board, but I still have my suspicions on his sister and also Nadia. What's the relationship that she had with Malcolm? Does she have anything to do with this? Because remember, she even said that number 2, it happens to be money, sex, and revenge. If she had a relationship with Malcolm, she might have been jealous that he was with his girlfriend, Kate. There might have been some revenge going on. He might have stolen an idea from her book. So again, let's keep an eye on Nadia, but also, again, I can't seem to shake off my suspicions on Reese. He seems too good to be true. He has a dark past. He seems to be the odd man out in this privileged group of people. I am very, very intrigued by what's going on so far, and I really enjoyed this second episode. So like I said in my episode 1 review, I'm going to go ahead and watch episode 3 now. Episode 3, titled Eat the Rich. Now, to me, this season has gotten better and better, and even though this episode was the shortest out of the 3 so far, it definitely had a lot to offer, and I'm so excited to be breaking it all down for you all. But we see the stalker has gotten to Jonathan after exposing his past with these articles for Joe to see exactly what this stalker is capable of, which is simply destroying his life. But more importantly, this individual not only knows where Jonathan lives, but he's actually entered his safe haven, and Jonathan must ghost this person to regroup. As now the Eat the Rich killer is born, as Malcolm's finger was sent to the London Dispatch with a note that he's been murdered, and this is being connected to Simon's murder. So clearly this killer, or killers, enjoys being in the headlines and seems to be cocky and flashy, which probably will work against him, but we see this forces Jonathan to play their game, and he has their full attention. But the question is, what does this individual or individuals want from Jonathan? They want him to admit that he's Joe, and also, why did he kill all those people from his past? This person is willing to blackmail Jonathan and uses Simon's ear attached to Jonathan's name as leverage, which definitely gets Jonathan's attention even more. Now we see Jonathan notices how upset Nadia is after learning of Malcolm's death, which adds more fuel to the fire of them having potentially more than just a professor and student relationship, and it was definitely more intimate than what it seems, which we actually get that confirmation a little bit later. But in the meantime, we see Kate continues to give Jonathan the cold shoulder and sends the police to investigate him, and we know Jonathan doesn't need that particular attention. He is actually quick on his feet, lets the police know that Simon was involved and there was a painting fraud situation, and he actually brings Blue into the mix, and for now it seems to work, as the stalker messages Jonathan that he wants them to do something, which is kill Kate. As we finally get the confirmation that Nadia and Malcolm did have a relationship, as she is caught at Jonathan's door to find a letter that would expose her. But we know Jonathan's a nice guy. He agrees to help her out, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Cut to Jonathan. He attends Malcolm's funeral to see if he can spot the killer, and one by one he can't seem to place the killer. But there is a brief moment in which we see a man with long black hair bumps into Jonathan, doesn't say sorry, and I think that's something important to remember, which we'll get into that ring here in a second. But we see, after listening to Reese's kind words at Malcolm's funeral and exchanging some words with Vic, Jonathan must keep an eye on Kate and tries to continue to get on her good side, but strikes out yet again. But he must follow her in order to catch this killer who wants her dead. We see he manages to share this moment in which Kate isn't being mean and actually shares her childhood and how she was taught and raised to hide her emotions and her feelings, which actually explains why she's been so cold in the season so far. She then goes upon to take him to her favorite spot. Also, you'll notice that there's someone kind of watching them while all this is going on. The little game of cat and mouse leads to something that I think we all saw coming, full pun intended. We see Kate and Jonathan sleeping together, and it appears that the person following them was Vic. Now, Jonathan takes this advantage to look for that letter for Nadia, finds the letter, but ends up getting caught by Kate in the process, and this romance is short-lived as she kicks him out, but more importantly, he did manage to get that letter. See, the killer takes the opportunity to tell Joe who they think that Joe is, as they tell Joe that they believe that he protects those that he loves and he actually enjoys the feeling of killing, as we see during this moment that Kate pays a visit to Malcolm as Jonathan listens to her venting, which we see Vic followed Jonathan and finds Malcolm's missing ring in his back pocket, and they have a bit of a fight, which leads to Jonathan defending himself and actually unfortunately killing Vic in the process, and we see that he buries Vic next to Simon. So we know that the killer must have been within inches of Jonathan to have planted that ring, or maybe Kate, when they were sleeping together, put the ring in his back pocket. I'm also in the frame of mind that there are, as I've been saying in this review, not just one killer, but multiple killers involved. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. We see the killer or killers have taken this opportunity to yet again mock Jonathan, but this time it actually works, as he's starting to crack and messages back with some not so kind words, including that he is determined to ending this person's life. But Jonathan catches himself before sending it and notices that this person is lonely and plays into their hand and admits to enjoying killing, but will they take the bait? Meanwhile, Nadia picks up the letter as Jonathan gives her the Year of the Magical Thinking, which is actually a book about a author who lost her husband, and it's also a book that kind of dives into the process of grieving and loss, which would be a perfect book for someone like Nadia who just lost someone to read. Gotta go back to this meeting, and the killer takes the bait and wants to meet soon. We end on this episode with Jonathan going to meet Penelope, but we see that the whole crew is there. And not only the crew is there, but the police are there wanting to talk to Jonathan. So breaking it all down to me, we see this relationship between Jonathan and Kate. I think it's going to continue to evolve, even though that she says otherwise. Also, speaking of relationships, Nadia and Malcolm, I've been saying it for the very beginning, especially in episode 2. I think that their relationship is very important, but more important, that letter has to be key. And I think Jonathan may regret not actually reading that letter, because I think it says something about maybe revenge, murder, money. I got my eye on Nadia, but also, who was that mysterious person who bumped into Jonathan at the funeral? I think this whole Vic killing will probably have some more importance to this season, because technically, not only from a narrative perspective, but from a character perspective, this was technically the first official kill that Joe has committed this season. Now, when it comes to, is this Eat the Rich killer a part of the crew, or maybe was a part of the crew at one point, or they were done wrong with the crew? That's the big question. Who is the killer? And like I said, or potentially killers, let me know your suspect list in the comments below. Episode 4 titled Hamsey. And look, just when your boy thought I might have figured out who the killer or killers might be, this episode might have proved me wrong. Or did it, is the question. So the big question in episode 3 was, what do the police want with Jonathan? Well, they're there to talk to someone sober, which is good news for him, as his story matched up involving Blue and the stealing artist situation, as they're now pursuing Simon's past, and they actually want Jonathan to help them in this case. Speaking of Jonathan, he gets the invitation to go into Phoebe's country house, in which he accepts in hopes of finding the killer. Now, Jonathan is packing his bag, and now he's watching Kate packing as well. And very interesting moment here with Kate. She's on the phone with someone, trying to set up a meeting with someone that she hasn't spoken to, which appears to be years, and she doesn't want to speak to them. She hangs up the phone, and as soon as she does that, to me, I immediately thought she must have daddy issues, which we'll be getting to her dad a little bit later. But let's also talk about this moment that we get with Adam and his debt situation with the lenders wanting their money, but Adam seems to really not care. But I did find his underappreciation of what I assumed to be his financial advisor to be interesting, because to me, this is where my mind is at. Again, me thinking the killer may be fed up with the ways that these rich characters treat their hand that they've been dealt. So that was a very interesting scene. Let's talk about Jonathan, who is grabbing his things. He's headed off in hopes that when he returns, things will be back to what he considers normal. Now, as he arrives, he's welcomed by a greeting by Gemma, who has a big moment in this episode, as well as this passive-aggressive compliment by Rold, who is on a hunt in this episode. So we see Jonathan learns that there's no service where they're located, which means there's no messages from the killer, and he receives a note to head to the portrait gallery, and he takes his weapon of choice, thinking that he might be meeting the killer officially and hoping to kill them, only to find Phoebe in this sex room with all her toys. Now, we have at first this kind of 50 Shades of Grey situation, but it then quickly returns into a therapy session as Jonathan turns her down. She goes ahead and details her relationship problems with Adam, but Jonathan eventually cheers her up and promises her that Adam worships her. Important note, this is a prime example of how these characters are so great at pretending. We would think from the outside looking in that, oh, Adam and Phoebe, they probably have a good relationship, but again, they're pretending to be happy, which we'll get into Adam's thoughts in a second. But we look at how these people treat that are people beneath them, as Gemma embarrasses one of the workers, and again, makes me think that this show is subtly placing these moments like this and these characters like Blue to show us as an audience that maybe the killer was wrong by one of them, and at this point they want to take revenge. And again, keep in mind all these things that Gemma is doing in this episode. So here I am thinking that Adam doesn't care about his finances, but to be proven wrong, as he's seeking advice from Jonathan revolving around marrying Phoebe, but not necessarily entirely for love, but knowing that marrying into her family comes with some rules, but also comes with some benefits like being financially stable. These characters cease to have connections. They don't seem to really care for one another, but instead they seem to want to take things from one another, as Jonathan learns that Rose was the one that actually invited him, and now he's starting to think that he's someone he should keep an eye out for. Speaking of something interesting, as I predicted, Kate and Jonathan couldn't keep their hands off each other, but we see Jonathan at first. He's able to shoot her down to focus on the mission, as we actually get a little bit of backstory between Kate and Rold, their relationship, and all signs right now are pointing towards him being jealous and taking out anyone that affects Kate negatively. But again, knowing that this is episode 4, this can't be the killer, right? It almost seems too easy. As Jonathan sneaks into his room and he finds these very kind of stalkerish photos on his camera of Kate, and even if Rold isn't the killer, he is definitely obsessed with her at the very least. Now, we'll admit that the whole Rold being jealous of Jonathan and Kate's development in their relationship seems to be a little bit too on the nose for me, but again, thinking about this series, they tend to be on the nose a lot when it comes to the show. But we learn that Rold and Kate go back to the age of 15, and they went to boarding school together, which was in the US. We also learned that her mother took her own life, and that kind of put Kate on this path to kind of fixing broken people, what she considers to be broken people, which might explain why she's in a relationship with Malcolm and why she's surrounding herself with all these terrible broken people. But I thought this scene was very interesting at the same time. We see that Rold is telling Jonathan how Malcolm and Simon were wrong for her, and then he points the gun at Jonathan, not knowing that the gun was pointed at him, and it almost set the scene up almost as if he was going to shoot him, but Kate comes in, almost seems to have saved Jonathan without him even noticing. And again, this goes back to what I said in my last video. I believe that there are 2 killers involved, and that prediction in mind may be Rold is the muscle of the situation and Kate is the brains. Well, as we see in the next scene between the two, that proves to be wrong for the moment, because there's definitely signs of him being involved with having bad intentions, but the Kate being the killer isn't online quite yet, which leads us into Jonathan and Kate. They couldn't manage to keep their hands off each other, and we do see them hooking up yet again, which I think we all saw that coming. But we fast forward to dinner time, and it's time to learn about Kate's lies. As we see Rold and Gemma mention how Jonathan may be the killer, they then shift their energy over to Kate and how she's forgotten she's one of them and mentions her dad, and they don't really elaborate and they just stop right there. Makes me think again that there's something going on with that phone call earlier in the episode, and that they might have done something wrong to someone in the past, which we will be getting into. But this conversation is interrupted because there's a game being set up by Phoebe to find the killer, and during this game we get the conversation between Jonathan and Kate, in which we learn Kate's father, who goes by the name of Tom Lockwood, he's an activist investor who's known for killing companies, but also he covers up for companies that have done wrong to others, and he's considered to be one of the most powerful people. As we learn that one of the cover-ups by Tom involved the killing of children who got cancer from some type of water situation, and that she hasn't spoken to her dad since she was 20 years old, which hints towards that conversation that she was having on the phone earlier. So going back on my prediction and my slash theory of someone who might want revenge is starting to make a little sense, right? Maybe her father ruined someone's life, and now that this person is taking revenge and taking out members of his family and even friends of that family member. Let me know your thoughts on that. But we see Jonathan is slowly but surely falling in love with Kate. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the execution of this scene, but we see Rold is finding Jonathan and his belongings only to push him out of the window. He didn't want to kill him. He just wanted to kind of hurt him, and he actually did have like a slight injury, it looks like, but also it seems like his ego was more hurt more than anything. Jonathan hears a scream. He immediately runs to Kate's room to find Kate with a knife in hand, blood on her hands, and a dead body, and that dead body is Gemma. I want to remind you all, who was the person throughout this episode embarrassing the workers, making fun of the workers? My question is that showing us that Kate killed her, or are we going to find out, as again, I haven't seen episode 5, that maybe one of the workers did it and Kate just happened to come in the room and took the knife out of her to help her friend that she really doesn't like? Let's talk about it. Is she the killer, or again, was this just a mistake and we're just walking into the moment and we're going to find out next week that she didn't kill her, or maybe she did kill her? We found out in this episode that she does not like Gemma at all, and Gemma's, rotted inside, and she didn't really want to associate herself with her. So are we looking at Jonathan falling for another killer like we did with Love? Let me know your thoughts on that. My overall thoughts of this episode is loved it. I think this is the best episode of the season so so far. I'm still thinking that Kate Father Tom did something wrong, and maybe that's going to be a key part of maybe not this first part, but maybe in part 2. And of course, role jealousy will be very important moving forward. Also, can't leave out the fact that Reese wasn't here, which makes me curious on what he was up to, or was he secretly there? And also, the relationship between Phoebe and Adam seems to be an important plot point that we can maybe look forward to. Again, maybe not in the next episode, but maybe in part 2. So overall, I thought this was a fantastic episode. We have one more episode left in this first part. Hopefully we're going to get some of those answers. I don't know if they're going to give us a definitive answer of who the killer is. Again, it could be Kate, it could be Rold, it could be someone else involved with her father's past. I really enjoyed this episode. All my you fans out there, we finally made it to the end of the road, and that is the season 4 part 1 finale, episode 5, which was titled The Fox and the Hound, an episode that finally reveals who the Eat the Rich killer was. We'll be breaking it all down in this spoiler ending explain, but before we get into it, this is just a reminder that this has been a part of a series of reviews in which I've been breaking down each episode of this first part. So if you missed out, check out my breakdowns for episode 1 through 4, and for all those that have been watching these reviews, I really thank you so much, and we'll talk about that in the video. But we have an episode finale to break down, theories, predictions, we're going to talk about it all. With that being said, full spoilers ahead. The big question ending the 4th episode was, after finding Gemma's dead body, is Kate responsible for this? Is Kate the killer? Well, if you ask her, she isn't. But more importantly in this scene, Kate doesn't want to get her father involved, because as we find out, Tom Lockwood is someone that does cover-ups, and he's been trying to reach his daughter for many years, and if he gets involved, he's going to own her. So we see Kate trying to convince Jonathan that she isn't the killer, that she didn't kill Gemma, and then she actually turns the tables on the situation as she starts to threaten Jonathan that, hey, she can go ahead and tell the others and blame him on this situation, and obviously he doesn't want that. So they agree to help each other out. They shake hands. He's not going to abandon her. She's not going to end up telling people that he was involved, so they're going to work together, at least for the time being. So we see them two coming up with a plan to get rid of the body, but in comes Phoebe sitting on Gemma's body, and she wants some advice, but they manage to convince her to leave because they want to do some things, some adult things, but she believes them, leaves the room, and their means of taking the body ends up breaking, leaving them to throwing Gemma's body out of the window, and it surprisingly works. As they get rid of the body, time for some truce as Kate puts a knife to Johnson's throat, thinking that he did it because, hey, he's pretty good at what's happening right now, which surprisingly leads to him telling somewhat of the truth to blame her on the death of Gemma, and someone did the same thing to him in discovering Malcolm's body in his place, which he starts to kind of go into the details of this stalker killer messaging him, as well as he goes into his past with his relationship with Love. He also brings Henry into the equation, and of course us as fans, we know that he's leaving out a lot of details and how that whole story plays out, but the most important thing in this moment is she believes him, but does he believe her? Now, I'm not gonna lie, even though I was way more invested in what was going on in Kate and Jonathan at this point in this episode, I did get a good laugh out of Phoebe and Adam, who I think are hilarious in this season, as he tells her his kink and they're trying to work things out, but she ultimately can tell that something's off and he's not really into what's going on. And we all know his kink is the golden showers, but he tells her the reason that this kink isn't working is because he always looks at the person doing the action as someone that's beneath him. And as we know, Adam doesn't feel like they're on the same level. So at the moment, she ends things with Adam, but by the end of the episode, they get back together. We'll talk about that when we get there. But as we see, Adam now wants to take out Jonathan because he told the truth of what his kink was. Meanwhile, Kate mysteriously can't find her bracelet, and if I'm being honest with you all, I thought Kate did that on purpose, but she didn't. But she loses her bracelet, which leads Jonathan to going back to the body. Meanwhile, we cut back to her room where we see that Phoebe is in there and she sees the blood on the rug, and then they have this conversation, which I'm not gonna lie, at first I thought it was kind of lazy writing because surprisingly Phoebe handles the truth pretty well, and I was thinking to myself, wait, is this kind of a flaw in the story just for the sake of move forward to get to the ending, or was this more of a character development, which plays into the idea that these people aren't really friends and they really don't care about each other? But we see in the actual scene, Phoebe kind of blames it a little bit on the drugs that they took, so that's why she's handling this kind of more on the lighter side, which I guess is kind of perfect fashion for these type of characters, that it kind of plays into, one, she doesn't really care about Gemma, but also two, she's kind of high, so she really can't really fully understand what's going on. Roll was outside the door listening to it all, which means he's headed straight to Jonathan. Which brings us back to this plot of Rold hunting the poor as he has a gun in hand and he's trying to prove to the others that Jonathan is the eat the rich killer. Important to remember that they are also all kind of high off their mind right now. Also, they were playing the game of a murder mystery, so they're all kind of slightly not taking this seriously. But as Rold goes into details, he convinces the others that it was Jonathan that killed Malcolm and kind of goes over his reasons. He was also responsible for the death of Simon, as well as he is the one that killed Gemma. Now we see Jonathan tries to plead with them, but Rold heard enough and sentences him to death, as we see Adam attacks Jonathan only to just get knocked out, leaving Jonathan to running, and Rold is on this peasant hunt. All that's happening, we see Kate learns of what's going on. She sends her father's bodyguards to stop this. As we see the hunt taking place, Jonathan, he ends up taking out Roll with ease. And this goes back to my episode 4 breakdown, in which I wondered, where is Reese? So after we see Jonathan knock out Roll, well, surprise, surprise, here is Reese as he knocks out Jonathan and takes him to a secret hiding place. Again, if you go back to my previous breakdown and even in my very first review, I even mentioned that to me, Reese stood out amongst the others because he didn't seem like he fit in too much, especially comparing the relationship he had with his family and all the stuff he was telling Jonathan in the previous episodes kind of led up to this. But at the same time, I'll be honest with you all, even though I might have predicted it, I also had other predictions that it could have been Kate at one point. It could have been Simon who ended up dying. So I will say I did kind of see this Reese reveal coming, and I think there's actually a lot more to that, which we'll talk about in this video. But again, let me know what you all thought of the reveal. Did you think it was Reese? Did you think it was someone else? Let's talk about it in the comments. But going to the actual breaking down of the scene, we see Reese reveals that this was a part of a project of taking out all these rich people, and that he wants Jonathan's methods in blaming the dead and wants Jonathan to kill Roll. Now we see Jonathan continues to kind of play into his hands and plays along with Reese. Back, he wants his job to be done. Why is Reese doing this? Besides them being horrible people, what led Reese down this path is a question I have for you all in the comments section. Going into the discussion here, Reese discovered Jonathan hasn't made a move in killing Rold and realizes he's been lying about working together and goes back to square one and the blame on Jonathan and killing Malcolm and leaves both of them to burn alive. See, Jonathan gets out of the chains and Roll awakes and wants help, but for a split second there, it almost looked like Jonathan didn't want to help, and if he was just going to kill him. But again, if there's one thing that Reese has given Jonathan as far as advice, if you go back to episode 1, they talked about this road of redemption and redeeming your past mistakes. So I think in this moment when we see Jonathan freeing Roll, that kind of ties into this overarching theme of Joe trying to be a good person, even though he's killed many people in the past seasons. But at the time, we see him saving him, and in comes Kate, helping them in the process. So as we wrap up this episode, we see Gemma's death being reported on the news, and yet again, the eat the killer has struck again. But we also see in this scene that Jonathan's innocence has been confirmed, but no messages from his best friend Reese. As we wrap up in the final scene, we see Kate arriving to Jonathan's house with clothes, which I found to be odd, which were Malcolm's clothes that he never wore, and Jonathan points that out as well. She's very thankful for what he was willing to do with the bracelet situation, and we see that she wants to kind of go on this path of maybe learning more about each other and maybe falling in love, but Jonathan, aka Joe, smartly declines, and his reasons for falling in love again makes a lot of sense for us as the audience. Obviously, he told her in the previous episode that he was married, he had a kid, but obviously he didn't give her the full breakdown of what he did prior to meeting love. but we'll see what comes of that relationship. We end on this scene where we see Reese getting interviewed, and we see Jonathan telling us as an audience he has his foot in both worlds, a monster hiding in plain sight. Boy, does that sound familiar to Joe, right? As Joe and him are more alike than Joe realizes, or should I say Jonathan realizes, as Reese has big plans for running for mayor of London. So recapping this whole thing, final thoughts, kind of predictions for what I hope to get in part 2. So I guess it's safe to say that Jonathan didn't tell the others because it would have became a game of he said. They probably would have took Reese's benefit of the doubt. That's why I'd imagine why Jonathan didn't tell them that what he actually discovered. I'd imagine that's going to be something obviously to explore more in part 2. But I will say, I love this idea that they are almost the same person, as Joe has told and convinced himself that all these murders were justified. All the people he's killed in the previous seasons were people that were harming people that he cared about, and those people couldn't defend themselves. Let's take that same ideology and apply it to Reese. Reese is a person who sees the bad in the rich, and he sees how the rich takes advantage of the poor. The rich turn a blind eye when bad things happen. We learn that even Tom Lockford, the father of Kate, is someone that does these terrible cover-ups, and like Joe, he thinks he's doing the right thing by getting rid of them. Malcolm, Simon, Gemma. So just looking at these two characters, and if there's any comic book fans, in particular DC, I would imagine come part 2, we're going to have this story where it looks like Batman, Jonathan being Batman in this scenario, versus a Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face, that being Reese, squaring off, and I'm really excited to see how all that pans out. But there's still a lot of questions on the table. Will we see Kate and Jonathan ending up together? What about the Quinn family and them having that hitman looking for Joe? Will they still be involved? And also, I would hate if they just kind of resolve the Mairin situation with her just going back to Paris. I would assume that she will have something to do with this second half, especially exposing Joe and his past. Also, can't forget too, as I kind of wrap up, maybe someone's going to be looking for Vic's body, because we remember that Jonathan killed him a couple episodes ago, so I would imagine someone is looking for him potentially. And I also have this feeling if someone is helping Reese, I still have a feeling that someone is helping him in this process. But what's going on, everyone? So I'm in the middle of editing this video, and I couldn't shake this theory in my head, and that theory is, you all know throughout this first part how Phoebe and Jonathan kept talking about the secrets they exchanged, and we as an audience never really knew what secrets he told her and vice versa, which got me thinking, what if on the night that Jonathan really met Phoebe and they were at the Soho Club, what if he told her who he really was as Joe and what he did in his past, which would make sense considering all the things that Reese knew about him. But also, going back to this finale, you all will recall, as I broke down, the moment in which we see her just accepting what happened to Gemma and not really making a big deal out of it. And I know she blamed it on the drugs, but diving a little bit deeper, what if it's revealed in part 2 that Phoebe was actually working with Reese? I know it's a crazy theory. She's so nice, she's so sweet, but wouldn't that be the perfect twist that we would never see that coming? Let me know what you all think about that. But also, you all know that I have my thoughts on Kate and her being the killer at one point and now her not being the killer. I still just have this weird feeling about her because I go back to when she was mugged and she had her watch taken. It just seems so make-believe and all made up just to kind of set this chain of events. But then you think about the finale, how she just mysteriously misplaced her bracelet with Gemma. I don't know. I have my feelings on Kate. And again, just tying it to Reese. Maybe she's working with Reese. Let me know what you all think of those theories. But I'm going to let this video continue to play out. Just want to share that with you all. As I digress, I really did enjoy this first half. I thought each episode was better than last, and I'm really excited to see what they do. And I just really enjoyed the idea of seeing Jonathan being someone trying to solve these murders, kind of being a Sherlock Holmes, and kind of really turning the show on its head, because after a while, it kind of feels repetitive. So I love that they're kind of taking this path of redemption with Joe and having him involved with someone that's almost identical to him. So overall, I really enjoyed this first part. I'm really excited for this part 2. And again, I want to thank every single one of you all that's been watching these reviews up to this point. Again, if you haven't already, you can check out my previous thoughts, see my predictions, see my theories of the previous episodes. And again, if you are one of those amazing people that has watched all 5 reviews, put in the comments 5 for 5, letting me know that you support the previous 5 breakdowns, but it also lets me know that you all would like me to do this when it comes to part 2 coming out March 9th. Again, I thank you so much. Before you all leave this video, just a reminder to hit the thumbs up, share this video, share the other videos that I have made for this new part, as well as leaving your thoughts in the comments, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell. As you can see on the screen now, subscribe to the channel, check out my series of reviews for this part 1. You all are great. Hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you all on the next video.